Now we have the first step of our algorithm done. We created a packet that will be directed to the broadcast MAC address. So it's going to be delivered to all clients or computers on the same network. And it's going to ask for a specific IP, whatever IP that we use as the IP variable. Now it's time to move to the next step, in which we will try to send this packet into the network and wait for the response. So to do this, we're going to use a SCAPI module. But before we do that, I'm actually going to remove all the print statements and the show functions in here, because they just show stuff on screen and we were just using them to understand how SCAPI works. So I'm just going to remove this and this. And we're going to try to send the ARP request broadcast packet in here. Again, we're sending this packet because this packet contains the combination of the broadcast and the ARP request, so it'll automatically go to the broadcast MAC address asking for who has the IP that we pass as the IP as a variable. So the SCAPI function that we'll use to send this packet is called SRP. So we're going to do SCAPI.srp, and we'll put the name of the packet that we want to send, which is ARP request broadcast. Now SCAPI has a function called SR, which basically stands for send and receive, but we're using a different variation of this function, which is called SRP, and the only difference is the SRP allows us to send packets with a custom ether part. So as you know, previously we created an ether layer or an ether part and we used it in the packet that we're sending. Therefore, because we're using a custom ether, we're using the SRP instead of the SR function. Now, as the name suggests, this will send the packet that we give it and receive the response. But when this line will be executed, it's going to send this packet right here, but the response is not being captured anywhere. So like we were using before, because this function returns a value, we need to capture the value that the function returns in a variable. Now this is not any other simple function, it actually returns more than one value. Now looking at the documentation, you will learn that this function will return a couple of two lists. So basically it will return two values. Forget about the list part, we'll talk about that later, but for now we're going to focus on the fact that it's going to return to us two values, so two variables. One of them will represent the answered packets, so the answers that we got, and the other one will represent the unanswered packets. So in order to capture these two values that are returned by this variable, we're going to have to use two variables. And because I like to use meaningful variable names, we're going to call them answered, put a comma, name the other variable, which we will call unanswered, and we're going to make that equal to our function. Now looking at this line again one more time, we're going to see that this will use the SRP function to send the packet that we created in the previous lectures and wait for the response. When it gets the responses, it's going to return two sets of values. One of them is the answered packets and the other one is the unanswered. Therefore, we're capturing it in two variables. One of them we're calling answered and the other one we'll call it unanswered. Now again, these are just variable names. You can use any names that you want. One more thing I'd like to highlight. When we are using this function, note that we are not giving it a destination. We just tell SCAPI to send this packet. We don't tell the function where to send the packet. The packet is going to go in the right direction because we added an ether layer to it, and in that layer we set the destination MAC address. So if you didn't want to send this packet to the broadcast, you can just use any MAC address on the network here, and this packet will be delivered to the location that you want. So this is the way to use the SRP or the SR functions in SCAPI. Even if you were building a completely different program, all you do is you just give the packet to the function, and before that you have to configure your packet to go in the right direction. Again, you can look at all the fields by doing ls followed by the class name that you're using, like I showed you before. Now there is one more thing that I want to add to this function, which is a timeout. Basically, when we set a timeout, we are saying, wait for this amount of seconds. If you don't get any response, move on, don't keep waiting. So I'm going to set the timeout to 1. And what this will do is, whenever this is working, if it sends a request and gets no response, then it will only wait for 1 second and move on. If you don't add this timeout, you'll be stuck, because if you don't get a response, you will never exit out of the program. Finally, now that we have all of this done, let's print the answered summary. So we're just going to do print answered.summary. Now, like I said, the answered will contain the answered packets, so we're only printing a summary of the answers that we got. Let's go and run our code. And as you can see in the summary, we can see the first part, which is the request that we sent. So for example, in this request, we were asking who has 10.0.2.1 till 10.0.2.8. And then the response came from this MAC address saying, I have that IP. Again, in here, we're asking who has 10.0.2.2. The response came from 10.0.2.2, giving us their MAC address. And same happened for 10.0.2.3 and 10.0.2.7. Now, if we print the unanswered, you'll see that we have much more entries in here. And as you can see, we're asking who has this IP address, and we're getting no response. We're asking who has this IP address, and we're getting no response. So as you can see, this tells us that these IPs are not used by any clients on the network, which means that there are no clients using them.